I don't
there
know
we
what
go.
happened.
Okay.
It
All
was
right.
staring me right
I
in
see
the face.
record.
And so just to reiterate, we are now recording this presentation, so please be aware that any audio or video being shared will be recorded.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. My name is Daniel Tomkins, and I'm the founder of Grow Mars, and kind of the team leader here for the Solarpunk Mars Society city-state team that we formed. I'm a doctor of plant medicine, so very similar to like a veterinarian is for animals. I do for plants, helping to manage diseases and insects and soil fertility and such. And I guess I can kind of introduce myself as a space skeptic. I was kind of skeptical of all these plans because I always saw, agriculture first and then civilization, and a lot of the imagery was missing a lot of the agriculture. It takes a very large amount of area here on Earth to feed a lot of people, let alone with more constraints in space. And I came up with a concept to kind of create more greenhouse space, if you will, where this concept is centered around. And that was more than 3 years ago, I think, at this point. So it's been a long-running concept that I was thankful enough to form a team around and do a submission on this. So I'm not going to go through all these slides, but I'm going to jump through them because there's some interesting things along the way. ISRU, in situ resource utilization, it seems like most of the people on this call, let me know, Stelly, if it jumps up to 100 people or something, but are pretty familiar with the Mars context and space. Oops. Sorry about that. And, closed loop systems, they have this, they cycle the materials, but they don't necessarily expand. And, as you know, entropy will really eat away at these systems. So even if we do make that perfect bubble, perfect kind of closed system, you still need input into it, and it's not going to ever be a 100% efficient system. So in doing this, and looking at that kind of constraint, I said, well, what if you can expand it? What if you can kind of outpace entropy by expanding that bubble of life? And it turns out that with plastic, and this is just kind of comparison, like inorganic processes of, say, like CO2 scrubbing and oxygen manufacturing with biological. Biological may be a slower kind of up the entropy ladder, but you get a lot of things in return. If you do biological life support, you get oxygen, you get carbohydrates, you get fats, you get proteins. You get a lot of things coming out of there, all manufactured just using sunlight. If you can grow plants, which is something that really can't be done inorganically. So there's a lot of benefits to doing biological life support and having a kind of a human-centric system that expands in capacity over time. I think is an important one. So let me look back at my notes here for a quick sec. So this really contrasts a lot with, a lot of the classic images of, let me see here, ISRU, with, here, the main constraints are, where's the solar power coming from? A lot of the concepts center around more power, if it's nuclear power, or more solar panels, producing solar panels on site. And then you're going to need the machines to then utilize that energy. So now you also have to make machines as well, or robots, to do the work for you. What if instead, kind of along the Solarpunk vision is, you really maximize the functionality and the material manufacturing from a biological standpoint. That way you kind of skip all those very entropy-prone manufacturing steps, both for harnessing energy and using energy to ultimately sustain. I mean, in space, you're really materially limited. So if you can meet all your needs, doing so passively, may be a more sustainable approach for a self-sustaining, self-sufficient, expanding population. So just jumping into clear plastic a little bit here, not the main point of this slide is that not all bioplastics are biodegradable. That was the key thing to this concept, is that I knew the plant end of the equation, that plants, fertilizers and the minerals that plants get from the soil, it's a very low percentage of their biomass. You look at a giant sequoia tree, and there's not a hole underneath it from all the dirt, all the soil that tree is taking up. Trees truly build themselves with hydrocarbons, and they do that using the CO2 inputs and water inputs for 97% of their mass to make cellulose and other sugars and their other materials that they build with. And that's often lost because we don't have to fertilize with CO2. Plants just get it naturally from the air. So I knew that part of the equation, and plastics is also the same. Plastics are a hydrocarbon, and they're very cheap to make. I say, the world's plastic problem may be a symptom of greater possibilities beyond Earth, because we pollute the world with it. I mean, I think that the amount of plastic bottles we throw away could go around the Earth, every year or so, from what we throw out. So as much as it's a problem, and you want biodegradable probably on Earth, in space, this is a polycarbonate made by Mitsubishi that's 100% bio-derived, that is non-biodegradable. And there's a number of plastics that you can do this way. So from a technical end, this is just kind of some of the biology. This is the kind of ConOps for how it would look. The fertilizer inputs, into this, let's just call it an algal biomass reactor. We're using algal biomass in this case. And, the inputs into that are sunlight, CO2, and water. And you get net oxygen from that process as well. You run it through a conversion reactor that's very low power and low mass, about 1 to 3 kilowatts, about 50 kilograms in weight. And you can produce kilogram per hour plastic grades, clear plastic, which is highly functional with this type of concept. And then 3D print in some regard, and then that's how you take kind of an initial structure, and if you will, quote unquote, self-replicate it to make a more structure that is also very high utility in the context of space. Let me take a quick look at my notes here. So another detail, this is kind of scaling over time. I see I've only got about 5 minutes left or so. In this slide, these are lungs here, and the mouths represent one person to feed and such. So, with biological life support, you very quickly meet the oxygen demands of people, but meeting the food demands is much higher. This is per square feet. And so oxygen, really, we can supply a lot of people oxygen very quickly, but the food part is really limiting. Even with 4,800 square feet, you're only going to be able to feed 3 people with that amount of area, and that's conservatively. That's saying 1/10 of an acre, and just the caloric needs. There's a lot of there's still a lot of question to how much area it takes, but about 1/10 of an acre is a reasonable number that NASA often uses. So actually producing the amount of having the amount of natural sunlit areas for a greenhouse on Mars, it's a significant amount of area. And in our process, we have an exponential way of doing that. With that plastic production conversion unit, it becomes linear because you hit a peak rate of plastic production with a certain scaled apparatus. But it truly is exponential, in which you're doubling your greenhouse space every 3 years, conservatively on Mars, by processing that biomass into more plastic. The rate of doubling for whatever your initial greenhouse size is about every 3 years, conservatively. Come back over to my notes. And then here's just a little, we played around a lot with it. With this concept, I've played around a lot with how to implement it. We have kind of a cubic spiral with some tessellating blocks, and before they're kind of put together to this mega structure, they solar track for maximum thermal gain. So I'm not going to get too much into all those details. But what I do want to talk about is this slide, to kind of wrap up some of the technical logistics of it. Is the Earth equivalent temperature on Mars, as much as NASA broadcasts the extreme low temperatures that they're operating in there, low temperatures and coldness are 2 different things. Is on Mars, and this was a great paper highlighting this concept, because when we were trying to do the heating requirements for a greenhouse on Mars, said, wait, the atmosphere is thinner. You're going to have less convective loss. So sure enough, if you're at, say, -50, -60 degrees centigrade, even with, an average wind speed of 10 to 20, it doesn't actually have the convective cooling of -50 degrees centigrade. It's more like -10. And then the thermal heating, although, it's broadcasted out, the amount of irradiation coming in, the solar insolation coming in from on Mars is reduced, there's no clouds. So many places on Earth actually receive less sunlight on a yearly basis than areas on Mars. That's a little bit harder to depict and a little bit more complicated. But the amount of sunlight is present. It's constant, which is really nice. Plants and biology really like consistent light intensities. You can really maximize their production if you know that. And the temperature isn't as bad as you want. Really the ground temperature is the bigger conductive loss. So you really want to kind of suspend. You want the kind of the least amount of ground contact for thermal circumstances. And so if you kind of want this hovering kind of hydrocarbon and water filled. We didn't get into deep space radiation, but plastics, it turns out, and water are really good for deep space GCR, galactic cosmic radiation mitigation. So this is the Frost Aquarium down in Miami, where there's about 30 feet of water between you and sunlight. And that's more than enough to mitigate GCRs. I think for a greenhouse, just for plants and maybe people are in for a couple hours a day, you could have much less. But what this also does is when you're internally pressurizing, you actually have this water weight as kind of a fake atmospheric pressure pushing down. So Dr. Zubrin recently had a paper on just that. Is kind of using the weight of a large ice or water-filled roof, and using that to push down so that you don't have so much tensile force pushing up. You kind of balance those forces out. And this is a bunch of, and here's just a mock model that we have, and then there's some other technical details and stuff. So that's it from my concept side that really plays into solar punk. And I think from a larger extent, you're to be able to expand and grow with limited resources in space. There's a very dystopian view often that we have to destroy the rainforest. We have to destroy the environment in order to expand and grow as a population. But I think if we can sustain and expand with very low intensity in extreme environments, whether it's on the moon or whether it's on Mars, that gives a lot of hope back on Earth that we don't have to destroy the rainforest. We can expand as a population and as an economy without destroying Earth, utilizing methods such as this, maybe more passive methods, more human-centered processes and stuff. So on that, I'll turn it over to Colin, and thank you, team, for embracing the Grow Mars concept.
Thank you.
Daniel, yes, thank you very much. Let's see if you, I think it's, yeah, stop sharing your screen, and then I'll go ahead and share mine. Okay.
And so, Dan, you should just have to pass the host back over to Colin for him to be able to share. But I also just wanted to take a note, and so anyone who's very interested in any of the thermal properties of Mars, I would highly encourage you to go back and look at the paper that Dan referenced in terms of modifying convective heat loss equations for the Martian atmosphere. So this is one of the more subtle findings that came out of this Grow Mars research, is that essentially the traditional convective heat transfer equations break down at the extremely low pressures of Mars. So this is something that I actually didn't uncover the previous year when I did a colony design, but found quite compelling and fascinating in the existing literature here. So we'll make sure to post that on both the Facebook group and the meetup page for anyone who wants to look further at that paper. All right, and I see Colin is host now, so we should be good to go.
Share. That figures all of the buttons that I need are, there we go. Okay, cool. All right, so this is then, so my name's Colin Lennox. I'm CEO of Eco Islands LLC, one of the co-founders of Settling Space. Stelly, Dan, and I have been here chatting for about a year or so, and we all ended up presenting at Mars Society here in LA last year, which was very fun. So this is the beginning of my presentation. And so my thing is wetland bioreactors, wetlands in a box. If you have access to the capabilities of bioremediation that a wetland is capable of doing, you have all of your nutrient cycling and also regolith processing and even atmospheric cycling. So my portion of my contribution to the entry was designing essentially the entire cycling system on, this goes over here, this goes over here, this goes over here kind of a thing. What is a wetland? Oh, that's Bill Burgos. By the way, just real quick. So these are some of the boxes that we build. This was iron and manganese from solution in an acid mine drainage site. That's Dr. Bill Burgos right there. He actually took some of the manganese and coconut coir, shredded up coconut husks is what I usually use for the organic matrix. He took some of that material and then tested against some pharmaceuticals and antibiotics in hospital waste and had some pretty reasonable results. Some things it knocked out almost entirely within 24 hours. Other things didn't touch at all. I can share that publication then later on. But then that gets into the gray water and the black water. So regolith, nutrients, atmospheric cycling, black water, gray water, lab water, hab water, wetlands. They do it here, and they always have been doing it here on Earth. If you think about the great biodiversity of last 3.5 billion years worth of evolution and biology, over that time, nature's found lots and lots of different ways to adapt and use just whatever is at hand. And that very process is self-selection that then leads to larger systems that are self-organizing. So self-selection leads to the self-organization. So what is a wetland? Real basically, holds water. I don't care if it's in a box or in a hole in the ground. If it's holding water and it's starting to develop hydric soils, it's a wetland. Produces energetically reduced or oxidized products, solids, solutes, and high gases. That's the hydric soils. If it's stinky, and if it's not using oxygen as the primary terminal electron acceptor, as it starts to drop down through different the electron acceptors, that's that state or condition. It's called natural attenuation and or just dropping from oxidative to reductive, and it helps to think of batteries. So if you've got the cathode and the anode, the plus and the minus, these are the same basic principles that wetlands are working under as well. This is why you can turn a wetland into a battery, essentially. But going back to it, high biomass of biofilms. There in a wetland, there's a lot of biofilm, a lot of biomass. Organic matter is surface area and high energy nutrient sources, plants, cattails, phragmites, a whole bunch of different wetland plants. And then in nature, they become the perching surface upon which everything can grow. By and large, but then they break down and then they die and then they re-release their material, and that in itself is kind of a negative. So there's a purposeful wetland and a natural wetland. Obviously, what I was talking about was natural right there. Purposeful wetland is a wetland in a box, a bioreactor, where you are specifically trying to achieve a product, a certain kind of work that yields something after X amount of time in which water flows through. There's changes happening within the constituents of that load, and then they're either captured, off-gassed, or pass on through in the case of nutrient salts or sodium and chloride. Wetlands can't touch that stuff at all. That's one of those ones where it just will not do it to any really useful effect. I mean, a little bit, but not useful. Let's see. So what is biofilm? You wake up in the morning, you get all that stuff on your teeth. That's biofilm. Biofilm covers every square inch of the planet, and it is theorized that up to half of all the biomass on the entire planet is stuff that you can't even see. And it is this biofilm. Biofilm in a natural wetland is doing the primary amount of cycling, all the breaking down of detritus, and it's the base. If you've got good healthy biofilm in large quantities here, then that allows for a lot more cycling up top. So if you're familiar with trophism, or if you go there's a 90% loss in energy and matter from every stage. So that's why you may have trillions of biofilm, and then you've got hundreds of chipmunks, so to speak, and you got one hawk. And so that's that scale where it's constantly exponentially reducing as that energy is transferred from point to point to point through that trophic scale. And that's what the boxes are designed to do, is to recognize that fact and to know that as you go through different energetic couplets in the wetland, different things you're trying to change, those different levels, they will yield less energy. So you got oxygen yielding the most, all the way down to methane reduction, carbon dioxide reduction, producing methane as the least energetically useful. That you still, I mean, obviously methane, you still have some methane you can work with, but that's from the top to the bottom. Like you'd have nitrate, and then selenium, and then sulfate, and then on to methane, perchlorates right in around the sulfate range. So it's biofilm, bioreactors, examples, wetlands, digesters, reclamation ponds. Technically you or me, I mean, we're walking around, we're a vessel, we self-organize. We've got lots of water in us. We can continue ourselves and reproduce. There's genetics involved. Under those definitions, why not? We're all just walking wetlands. Some of the earlier boxes that we had built, there's a system. This is actually one of my failures right there. That bigger system, where the water changed dramatically on us. This is a mine drainage system in West Virginia. And it was an early system, early boxes. Okay, good. I still got about 7 minutes. Sweet. Won't get too deep into that. The one on the left, that is low pH iron oxidation. Just another means of using microbes to pull out iron. In this case, at a pH that's about a 3. Well, it started at a 5.5 and then dropping down to about a 3.5. Benefits of self-organizing wetland bioreactors. Whole bunch of them, but I don't have a lot of time to go through it. So Steli, I'm gonna pop over to Steli, thank you for adding that in there. Okay, so real quick then, I had the energy section, everything, all of the above, whatever is available, whatever we can do. Passive is the big thing, as much as possible. And that said, so if a wetland-based, a self-organizing wetland reactor system that is doing your regolith processing, your nutrient, black water, atmospheric processing, these things, the microbes, they do it for free. They're just surviving. They do it for peanuts, essentially. So with a system that is highly predicated towards the use of biology, for example, so on our sites, when I started building wetland bioreactors, what we build versus the constructive wetlands that are out there, on average, we're about 1 to 2 exponents better treatment density. So in 1 to 2 exponents smaller space, we get the same amount of treatment as other wetland components used in bioremediation, big open ponds, limestone beds, spent mushroom compost beds. And because of that, then, since we're getting so much work done at lower energetic thresholds like pH, big one, manganese. In mining, generally, you got to run it up to about a 9 or a 10 pH. But if you let the microbes do it, you can do it at a 6.5, which is slightly acidic. That's rainwater. So it saves you an enormous amount of money. And this is a practical thing for mining. It saves you that money on caustic soda or other alkalinity amendments. Huge, huge deal. I mean, that's like make or break whether you're putting in this kind of system or this kind of system, or what kind of bonds you're given. So, or your treatment bonds, money you got to put up for your systems. So with that in mind, a system that is predicated on using wetland bioreactors should save you about 90% of the energy as required, and that you would normally have to pump in using the methods that you see on the screen. Only 10% of it would be necessary. But if you've still got those machines, send that energy off to something else, smelting, whatever else, water, heating water, and then or for melting slush. Actually, highly energetic process, and that would be useful for getting nice and unfrozen water into the reactors. You've got that extra power now. Let the bugs do their thing, and then you've got all the rest of this available energy that you wouldn't have otherwise had, let alone, and that's just energy, that's not even the products. Hydrogen sulfide to sulfuric acid, selenium if you need it, methane purification, perchlorate reduction. So those, I'll pop over to the next slide. Okay, so this is kind of hard to see. I apologize. This is a no-no. We're not really supposed to do this. Corey, I'll see if I can't bring that up, make that a little bit larger there. And this is in our entry, and it will, Stelly, I'm assuming we're going to have this at the end. But so looking, I'm just going to go over the colors right now. So pink, regolith, starting off. All that material, whether it's coming from tunnels and caverns that we're carving out underground, because I'm big into mining, stay underground. But then all that material that's coming out, run it through regolith processing. It's perfect. Why, you know, we don't have to worry about explosive decompression or the greenhouses popping when a fair amount of what we're going to be doing is going to be underground. So we've got the greenhouses, but and getting from settlement to settlement. Dan had brought up very briefly something Fasea. I apologize, I can't remember the number or the name, but he had chosen those areas that we're looking at specifically because there's long crevices that's easy to cover over, and then pop just right through the mountain, and then there's another crevice. Well, I'm going to be taking all that material. That's all getting dumped into the original perchlorate reactors. Then it's, you know, all the dust that you're getting off the soil. And what else did I have here? Dust, loose surface. And the mined ice and slurry. Well, which you can now melt down because you've got extra juice, because you don't have to dump it all into heating and smelting and melting ice. You've got a lot more juice, so you can produce a lot more slush to water. And it goes into then a leachate process because you got perchlorate. It's a salt. It's also rocket fuel, and it's got a whole lot of oxygen in it. So these are really, really, really useful things, but it's at a concentration that's so high that the osmotic pressure, think of the most saline natural environments you can think of on Earth. Mono Lake, the Dead Sea. There's going to be a lot saltier than that. Microbiology from this planet is probably not going to survive well on that at all. So you got to leach out the perchlorate first from the regolith. I'm looking at here on time because I don't want to get too deep into it. But this is one that everybody's always asking about. What do you do with the perchlorate? You know, everything else, you know, the Hab cycling nutrient, you know, that stuff's not too bad. But if you got to start, you got to pull out all that perchlorate. But then what you're left with is all that dissolved oxygen. Great. Depressurize the vessel, pull that O2 off, just like what do they call that? The bends. Essentially, you're making the water have the bends, and you pull the decompression sickness. That's what it's called. But instead of the nitrogen, dissolved oxygen. Because especially if it's warmer, that is a very low oxygen saturation level at like 75 degrees. It's like 7 milligrams per liter or something like that. That's why oxygen is so easily a deleterious thing that allows for changes within wetlands, because it's so easy to use it up, because it's so reactive. It's the first thing that is selected for is oxygen use as that terminal electron acceptor. The reason we're as big as we are, these big multicellular organisms, is because we're using O2 as our electron acceptor. Stelly, I think I'm running a little short here. So, so the blue ones there, or excuse me, the purple ones.
A couple minutes behind. You still have a few minutes, so if you need it.
I'll try to wrap in two. So
you have like 5 if you need it.
Oh, okay, awesome, thank you. And then after you've already leached out all the salts, and this could also be sodium, chloride, potassium, phosphorus, maybe lithium, any of these salts, you'll pull that out in that first process. And then, of course, you'll reduce the perchlorate, and then you see down there in 2C, electrolysis, RO, chloralkali process. There are mechanical processes and chemical and or electrical that you can then use, because we're definitely all of the above. Let the bugs do 90%, but we still need all the rest of that, the rest of the technologies that we've developed. The chloralkali, that's been around for like 150 years. It's very simple. Uses a lot of juice, sure, but it's damn near foolproof. So, and then in the light blue chain, then that is what's called, that's essentially your regolith processing, and where you are using a lot of acid, hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid, nitric acid. These are all different acids that can be produced in situ on planet and then dumped back into a portion of the process. So sulfuric acid, say, there's a lot of sulfate in the regolith from the predictions that I have come across. Well, that's great, because now we've got the ability to produce all that sulfuric acid, and that's basic mining technology here on Earth. That's how we get the vast majority of our copper and our zinc, is a sulfur acid leaching process that's then backed up by bioleachate. So the microbes are actually spinning up the process, and of acidogenesis, and your big heap leach process, the pile, or in this case, the big tank that has all of your regolith in. And then you dissolve it both through redox by removing oxygen and allowing for other for microbes to begin to dissolve certain metals and metalloids that can be put into solution. And then so you dissolve everything you can, and then the wetlands going from there. They're self-organizing, they're self-selecting, and then they're also separating the material out as the process goes through. So we can get, I've gotten up to 85% pure manganese oxide out of our systems just on the mountains up here. I'm in central Pennsylvania, just up in the mountains. And you get the iron out first, and you have organic carbon, pH of about a 6.5. And then your manganese, I've had up to 370 grams per cubic meter a day at 85%. That's saleable. That could be a couple dollars a kilogram right there. So it's valuable here on Earth in manganese oxide, batteries, structural steel. Those are right off the top, the two of the real biggies. So now we've got steel that we can work with, because obviously we've got iron, but now we've got all that extra energy we can smelt. Don't want to go too much more into it, other than there is the wetlands, if done in purposeful bioreactors designed for that purpose, like we've done, allows you to sort out the vast majority of the material. The green ones, HABs, 4A, 4B, and 4C, that's your civilian HABs where you live. The agricultural HABs is 4B, and then 4C are the industrial HABs, any place where people are going to be spending a lot of time in. If you'll notice, there's 4 little loop-de-loos there on the top of 4A. In the civilian HABs, we've decided for a design parameter that they have to produce at least 25% of all their own food and oxygen, or even better for oxygen. For the certain amount of people in that HAB, this is the X amount of time, because if you have explosive decompression somewhere and everybody's got to button up in their houses and it's bad, they've got a month. That's what we're looking for, that if we can't get to them in a month, something really bad happens. So that's a design parameter. But if you look, everything comes back to 4A, with the wetlands in the middle. And you've got, so the perchlorate and regolith, or perchlorate process, wetlands dividing all of that, doing the processing. And then you've got all of your civilian HAB, ag HAB, and the wild HABs. Actually, that was another one I had there, where it's wild HABs would be like orchards, those kind of things, but large enough areas where people can hang out, exercise, feel like maybe they're still back on Earth, kind of looking something like this here in the backyard. That's what you're shooting for just mental health. Yeah, Stelly, I guess I'll go ahead and kick it off. That's about my time, and those are the big points. Wetlands will do most of the work for us, and when they're self-organizing, they allow for separation of regolith, and that's what's going to keep us alive. We need to take the microbes with us, or we're never going to make it. That's my big portion of the whole process there. So I'm going to do a stop share.